Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be reviewing the Greek gift. Now this is actually a pretty sweet tactic that we can do, and it can happen in a lot of positions. You see, in this situation, right now as white, our bishop is facing the h7 pawn, and our queen wants to get closer. And we have this knight that we can very famously bring closer to the opponent's king. And the Greek gift name actually comes from the Trojan horse story. And you can also check into that. I tell a very kid-friendly version of it in class. um, but let's get right into it. Right now, we're going to be doing a bishop sacrifice to open the gates in front of the opponent's king. Right? We're going to open this pawn structure. After our bishop goes to h7, and there are two options that black can do. They can capture the bishop, or they can actually move the king to h8. Let's start with the easy option. Let's say king goes to h8, declines to capture our bishop. If that happens, we are going to be doing our classic move, bringing knight to g5. After we bring the knight to g5, we actually want to prepare this queen move in order to get it in front of the opponent's king. Now, they can do a lot of different ideas right now, like they can develop the knight, they can move their queen, or they can even attack our knight. It actually doesn't really matter that much what black does. Let's say they push the pawn to f6. If they move the pawn to f6, we can bring our queen to h5. We are going to be sacrificing this knight, and if they do capture it, there's actually a checkmate that we can do in two moves. So right now what we can do is, if you want to think about it, you can pause the video. Alright, now I'll go over it. We can now move this bishop to g6, checking the opponent's king with the queen, and after they go to g8, which is their only square, our queen can go to h7. So this is exactly what we want to do if the opponent doesn't capture our bishop. If they go to h8, we want to bring our knight to g5, and then boom, we want to bring the queen to h5. But let's actually go over what happens if they capture our bishop. If they capture our bishop, we again bring the knight to g5, and this is where things get interesting. Because right now the black king has four different options. If the black king goes to g8 or h8, we are going to bring our queen to h5 right away to bring the queen with tempo. And after king goes to g8, we can again do a very similar checkmate. If the king goes to g8 instead, we again bring the queen to h5. Now, we didn't bring the queen with tempo, as the king wasn't an h8, so we couldn't do a check. So maybe black thinks they can try to prevent this checkmate. And it is pretty difficult, I think impossible, to prevent this checkmate. If they try to push a pawn to make an escape square for the king, this doesn't really work out because our knight is also attacking f7. So we can do this checkmate. If they push the pawn to g6 to attack our queen, same thing happens. We can bring the queen to h7. Now there is a move like rook e8, and if the rook goes to e8, it might seem like they are preventing this checkmate. Now the king is in a super bad position, and we do want to capture an f7 to do this checkmate. If they block with the rook, if they protect with the rook, then there's no immediate checkmate right now. But there's actually a better way we can start in this position. Whoops. If the opponent's rook actually goes to e8. You see, when we did this plan, everyone, the problem was this pawn. If there was no pawn on f7 right now, this would actually be a checkmate. And because of this, when the opponent brings a rook to e8, we can actually start with queen f7 check. Our knight again protects the queen, they cannot capture our queen, and the king has to go to h8. So by making this little maneuver with the queen, we are eliminating that f7 pawn. So now we can bring the queen to h7. After king goes to f8, we can bring the queen to h8, and then boom. This is going to be a checkmate. So if the black king goes to h8 or g8, we bring our queen to h5 right away. But there are some other options too. For example, in this position, the king can go to g6. If the black king goes to g6, we want to bring our queen to g4 to still have our queen in front of the opponent's king, and our knight is going to be blocking this check, so this can help with a lot of discovered checks. Now, if black, let's make a random move for black. Let's say they move the knight. Of course, there are many different things for black to do, and in most positions, this is going to be a very long combination. Like if you see this in Grandmaster level games, usually white does get into a better position by doing the Greek sacrifice, by doing the Greek gift. But what happens is white usually gets maybe a pawn, and it directly goes into the endgame. So after the black knight goes to c6, what you can do is a checkmate in two moves. We can actually bring our knight to e6 doing a check. Our queen is doing this check, and our knight is attacking the opponent's queen, which is a discovered attack. But if they move the king to h7 instead of blocking with the queen, there's a checkmate right now in one move. Can anybody try to find how can white do a checkmate in one move? Okay, I'll go over it. We can actually bring the queen to g7. If you thought of that, good job, excellent. But if they block with the queen, it just gets prolonged by one move. So this is what we want to do if the opponent brings the king to g6. If the king goes to g6, we want to bring our queen to g4 to do this attack on this opponent's king. We very much want to push our knight to e6. Now, instead of that, you can also try to move your pawn to h4. Sometimes the h-pawn isn't there in the game. Sometimes it's on h2. So it really depends on the position, and we really need to think how to continue making this attack. Now, again, after our knight goes to g5, if the opponent's king goes to g6, we bring our queen to g4. If the opponent's king actually goes to h6, they're actually on this diagonal as our bishop. So if you want, you can secure a material advantage by doing this discovered attack. Now after this goes, you can capture that. But there are a lot of things you can do in this position. You can also try to bring your queen closer. The king will try to go to get there. And now you can capture the queen if you want. Or you can try to bring the knight to here to try to do this checkmate. But be careful. There are some things that the opponent can do, and you should be calculating them. Don't just memorize this. In different positions, maybe there is an escape square for the opponent that we might miss. And if you do all these sacrifices and don't get to do a checkmate, or we don't have an advantageous position, then it might not be very good. For example, if the opponent goes to this square, we can again capture this. If the king goes to here, we can do this maneuver. And now this is going to be a checkmate again. So we have to think for a lot of things that the opponent can do, and this can complicate the position a lot. But this is a general idea in the Greek gift. We first start with this bishop. If they capture, and if they don't capture, we bring our knight to g5. In the next move, we want to bring the queen closer.